Mags on Media, brought to you by the IAB Digital Summit 2016.
This week, overcoming the biggest blunders in the pursuit of the so-called pink rand. We check in at a unique event called the Creative Stock Exchange, a gritty new ad for an American youth development organization, and the best and strangest Super Bowl advertising. It's the world's biggest showcase for brands in a single day. A warm welcome to Mags on Media. All right, the market is worth billions, yet brands make simple mistakes in pursuit of what's termed the pink rand. Selling to the LGBT community is rewarding, but it's also tricky. Strategist Mike Santos from the agency The Strategy Department has written extensively on the issue and joins us at the top of the show. Mike, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining us. How big is the market in South Africa? And I think you're going to surprise our viewers.
Well, numbers-wise, we're looking at a market of roughly 5 million consumers. This is based on a study that was done a few years back by the Associated Business Network of South Africa, which found at the time that roughly 10% of the population in South Africa is either gay or lesbian. So if we extrapolate that to the current market's size, the current population size, we could look at a market of roughly 5 million consumers.
That's a lot of money to spend.
Absolutely.
Yet you're going to tell us that brands don't necessarily have a lock on this particular segment. Why?
I think a lot of brands just haven't recognized the value and the what this market can actually bring to the table. Secondly, I feel that there's been an issue in terms of the actual communication, so stereotyping the segments. I'm using things like assumptions and insinuations that actually interfere with getting the message across and engaging the consumer have been very serious issues for a couple of brands, both globally and locally.
In fact, you come up with 4 marketing blunders. You've alluded to some of them already, and we'll work our way through them. But is there also an inherent fear of this market? That
I think so.
Putting a toe into this market, it could put your brand at risk, as bizarre as that is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've seen definitely a certain backlash in the past with brands globally that have aligned themselves to the segment or shown support of the segment, where this has actually backfired, and they've had, for example, in the USA, which is still quite a conservative society, boycotts against the brands and so on. By the same token, though, what we've seen through some international studies is that for the majority of the population, for instance, a study that was done by Prime Access in the USA, that the majority of the mainstream market actually is quite indifferent to using, for example, LGBT symbolism or imagery or characters in advertising. So I think brands need to weigh up the pros and cons, but there's definitely something to be made by engaging.
Does a brand spring to mind, either here or globally, that really is getting this right?
If I were to look locally, I'd say a brand, because when we think of marketing, we tend to think of communication and advertising, but obviously marketing is much more than that. It's the marketing mix, it's every touch point with the consumer, and also what happens behind the scenes. So I think a brand like Club Travel, for instance, they've shown a very, very clear strategy in terms of engaging the LGBT traveller, recognise the value of these travellers to their markets. And what they've done, for instance, is that they've got a division within their company which deals specifically with LGBT travellers. So, for instance, if you phone in or if you have a query via their website, you get channeled through to this division where they handle your queries.
This is basic common sense, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think a lot of the times when it really boils down to common sense.
But common sense and being polite to customers, because it doesn't matter whether the rand is green, pink, or whatever the case is, it's a rand. But what about brands and inauthenticity?
Yes.
Are these the tryhards?
The tryhards, but also those brands that, for instance, again, have not taken into account the total marketing mix or what goes on behind the scenes. I think especially in today's highly connected world, we often forget that news travels very quickly, and bad news especially travels very quickly. I'll use the example of Target, the retail chain in the USA. They've been very inclusive and very clear in terms of their alignment to the LGBT community in the USA over the years as almost the opposition to Walmart, which has been the more conservative brand. But what they haven't actually taken into account on a lot of occasions is that things that happen behind the scene can actually have a very damaging effect. So, for example, in the past, they've found that Target was actually offering financial support to politicians in the USA who had themselves campaigned against the rights of LGBT consumers. So, of course, the word spreads fast, and you end up with a PR disaster, as they found themselves dealing with quite recently.
Very quickly, is stereotyping necessarily a bad thing?
I think there's a fine line between being stereotypical in a humorous way and being stereotypical to degrade. I think I'll use the example of a Harold's relationship hotline for Net Florist. I think there's
nice
a very
campaign,
stereotypical, absolutely, very stereotypical portrayal of a gay man in those executions. But at the same time, there's an endearment and a certain human truth that I think people find quite appealing. I can relate to those as well.
Mike Dos Santos, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Now, some new advertising we're going to show you. The YMCA, or the Y for short, is an American network of community spaces with a goal to strengthen communities through youth development, healthy living and social responsibility. For its first ever national advertising campaign, the organisation enlisted the agency Droga 5 to create a series of gritty spots that shines a spotlight on America's forgotten communities.
Idle hands. They say they're the devil's workshop. Easy targets. Quick to kill time. But give idle hands something to do, a place to go, a purpose. And they're capable of amazing things.
And you can tell us what you think of the ad on our very active Facebook page. And coming up on the program, we're going to look into something called the Creative Stock Exchange and also an innovative digital marketing solution for publishers. This is Mags on Media.
Mags on Media, brought to you by the IAB Digital Summit 2016.